Good morning. Shall we start? Okay, so streams are configured. We can start. Okay, all right. Um, so Esther, last week when we were discussing about privacy, we generally tried to understand what privacy today boils down to when it comes to the digital ecosystem, right? And what we realized, or at least from the data that was presented, both in terms of profit sheets, in terms of alternative models, the current ecosystems existing. One thing that is very clear to all of us is the fact that it is our experience, our knowledge, our data, everything that has been traded as the material. So, which means we as individuals or users who are using this system are the actual commodity. We are not the actual users, right? So usually what is being told to us is, you are the users, you're the amazing people, because of you only we survive. So what they're basically saying is, even if you take Facebook or Google or any of them, for example, there is them that is sitting there, right? There is us who are sitting here, and then there are advertisers who are sitting here. So in any business, it is a person who is paying to the service is the user or a customer, right? Um, so So in this case, what we are actually paying for is we are not paying for the service. We are rather the ones producing what is traded between the two, right? So these are the actual users, while we are the commodity, right? That is potentially how today's digital privacy has been boiled down to. And I'm specifically saying this because I'm not talking about this in the lines of Facebook, Google alone. I'm talking this in the lines of Aadhaar also, for example, right? In If you look at the way the Indian government has been pushing Aadhaar, it has been pushing us to contribute all the data that we can to a centralized system so that they can build analytics, they can understand the citizens better, which basically means that the government is slowly, in the name of Aadhaar, Health ID, and so many other things, the government is just asking the citizens to be more and more and more transparent, while the government is becoming more and more and more opaque, right? One, from the democratic standpoint, is that right or wrong is another discussion, right? In short, it is wrong. But roughly, it is this same principle, which is what Shoshana Zuboff calls as human experience as a free raw material. That's exactly what the digital companies today are capitalizing upon. Okay. But today's discussion is going to be more conversational over me presenting a lot of things. So we'll ask with the first question. This is a question to all of you. In your personal perspective, do you think privacy should be a fundamental right? Right. In India, privacy is a fundamental right. It comes under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. That also it comes as a essential for right to life. Right. That is how strongly privacy is written into the Constitution. But in your personal perspective, what do you think? Should privacy be a fundamental right? Anybody is free to share your perspective.
Hi Ram. So I do think privacy should be a fundamental right because I think everybody has this right or the yeah. I feel that everybody has a right to do whatever they want to without having someone else like sort of supervising or monitoring what they're doing. So I think it should be a fundamental right.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody else? You're free to write on the board. Uh, you're free to unmute and talk. You're open to do anything. But do share the perspective. That's very important right now.
So since on offline life, we have privacy. We close our doors. We put locks on our house gates and everything. So we practice a lot of privacy. At least the better privileged ones. So it's definitely a fundamental right, and it should be reflected on the online sphere as well. That's what I believe.
So, Rima, a slight question to you, right? So, when you say, I'm specifically picking this example of locking the door, right?
Right.
Isn't this idea of locking the door an alternative perspective of security and not privacy?
Even when it's like when we are in a room, in our house, we still lock our doors because we don't want people to barge in. And it's not about, we are not unsafe in our houses, we can stay with our doors open, but we still prefer to do it because uh, we don't want others to interfere in our private space.
Fair enough. Agree. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Others? Anybody else? Probably Kavya, Jaya, uh, Oma. I'm sorry if I'm reading your name wrong. It's Bronze. I could be reading your name wrong. I'm sorry. Jaya
I
also.
kind of agree with what Rima was saying that if in real life that we have the option and like we have the rights, like the ability to like fortify ourselves, shouldn't we have the same right online? I don't know about fundamental, but I do think that we have the right. I don't know.
Yeah, so the question specifically is so even if you take Lavanya's or Rima's or your expression, I agree that it has to be a right, it should be something so common. But the question really is should it be fundamental right? Meaning, so the difference between a right and a fundamental right is that if this right is not there, the rest of the rights cannot coexist, right? That's what it's called. That's why it's called a fundamental right. So should privacy be such a right, or is just a right? Anybody?
Okay, I'm going with yes. It should be a fundamental right. So yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so let me slightly go technical here. So when you're talking about privacy, right? So beyond, so let's try to define this idea of privacy, right? So when every time we talk about privacy, the most common understanding that I receive is, you know, closing doors. I want to tell it to people only I want to tell. Uh, it is my thing. So privacy is usually limited to only this, right? Beyond this, can any of you think of anything else that we can call as privacy beyond closing doors, beyond sharing a password possibly, or beyond saying it's just me? What can we call as privacy? What other things should be called as privacy? So, if we read the Supreme Court judgment, right? So, Supreme Court judgment defines privacy consists of three things. One is called decisional autonomy, so which basically implies that every individual has the right to make whatever decision on their own, right? It's not just about making decisions, it's about you having the autonomy to make decisions, right? The second thing we're talking about is called spatial control, which is what most of us were describing, right? Saying who should come inside my space, who should not. We were limited to the definition of a house, and I understand that. But in general, for example, who do we want to travel in the bike with, right? That's a very important question to ask. Who should, let's say, if I'm going in a bus or a train, do I have the choice of choosing should someone, sit next to me or not? So there are many of these questions which we have to define as space. Uh, so this also, in case if someone is sharing this in the shared notes, I put all the three in the chat so you can copy paste. Yeah, right. So if you look at it from the perspective of privacy in India, the 2017 Supreme Court judgment, it specifically talks that privacy is a combination of these three things. Okay. Now that we have a very legalish judgment of or a definition of privacy, let's go back to the original question. Should it be a fundamental right than just a right? You see, I'm trying to stress on this word. Why fundamental? For example, right to food is fundamental. If food is not there, you would probably not even exist, right? But if privacy is not there, wouldn't you not exist at all? I mean, why should it be given such a status as food, as clean air? It isn't it a little more overrated?
I guess it's because when you're talking about fundamental rights, you're not just talking about survival, but living and living well to your potential. And you need privacy in the sense of, like it says, decisional autonomy, what you can do, who you marry, something like that, which is which is under scrutiny now, is in a way eroding your privacy. So it has to be fundamental for you to be able to explore and be who you are, sort of an integral part of your liberation.
Right. One of the very important statements that came out in the Puttaswamy versus Union of India, which is the 2017 judgment, is when the judges remarked on the fact that life is not just an animal-like existence, right? It's not just about existing in the world. It's about everything other than that, right? Which is a very very important point. What other reasons can you think of for it to be a fundamental one than just one?
I feel that yes, I agree, Ram, and it's also looking at that quote from Puttaswamy judgment itself, which says that privacy is essential for safeguarding liberty, and we all agree that liberty is a fundamental right. I put the quote in the chat as well.
You're right. Fair enough. We can read liberty in many perspectives. Let's just read currently in the context of this conversation. Let's read liberty as freedom. Okay. Because if you actually go read the judgment in much more detail, there are clauses set on liberty, which again goes back to the constitutional guarantees, etc. But in this context, let's read liberty as freedom. What other reasons do you think could be? Is nobody going to be opposing the fact that why are we overrating and considering it as fundamental right? Okay, I'll take that as a no.
No, I
Okay.
guess our group now is so as unanimous as the nine benches who heard the constitutional challenge.
Oh, okay. Cool. But still, I mean, one thing it's very important for us is for us also to be the devil's advocate sometimes, because that's when we get to understand what alternative perspectives come in. Right. Okay. Anyways, so in short, what we wanted to specifically talk about in this slide is the understanding of privacy as a perspective and how human life is not just treating it to be, I was born, I lived, I die tomorrow. It cannot be treated like that. It is about how I'll right to dignity, for example. How do I'll make a living out of dignity. So there are so many perspectives. Go read Article 21 of the Indian Constitution specifically, right? And the judgment, what it specifically told was for everything to exist, you need, it comes under right to life. When you say right to life, it means that things come under right to life. There's a right to dignity, right to food, right to clean air, right to better roads. There are a lot of sub rights that is given. But what the judgment specifically told us, if you need right to dignity, you need right to privacy, right? There is no privacy without dignity. And if dignity is essential for right to life, it means that right to privacy is essential for right to life. And right to life cannot exist without right to privacy. And thus, right to privacy is a very fundamental right, right? And in terms of dignity and in terms of other correlational rights, is where Supreme Court has defined that this is what we should categorize privacy into, and the various aspects that come into it, everything is to be called as privacy and cannot be excluded otherwise, right? Unless again there are constitutional civil guarantees, etc., etc. I'm ignoring that part for now, but okay. Now that we have talked, so in yesterday's talk or today's talk, we are specifically focusing on this idea of informational privacy. Okay, I am not talking about spatial control. I mean, obviously, decision autonomy and spatial control also comes into the digital world, right? We have been explicitly stressing on the idea of informational privacy in the previous session, right? Today, we are going to be understanding these two also in perspective. Uh, but to understand that, we need to understand how the internet is working, right? So we saw, oh, Facebook is taking data, oh, Google is taking data, oh, everybody in the world is taking data. Should I not use anything on the internet at all? Should I just live like the good old days of 1940s where there was no thing called computer and all of that? But the real idea is there are alternative models, there are existing models. We need to understand them first, right? Okay, so in the current models of internet, when I say internet models, what I'm talking is how internet functions, right? For example, when I send a message to you in the chat here, how do you get the chat here? That is a functioning of the internet, right? So there are four established models so far that that is how the internet was supposed to be built. Internet was originally built to be like this, but for some reason it became like this. But let's try to understand why so. Okay. I'm going to be using graphics from different sites. In most places, I've kept the credits as is. You're free to go back and refer to these sites for better graphics in case it was not visible. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in. Okay. So this is specifically what I want to focus on. Now, in an everyday internet that we use today, right? So what's happening? Let's say we want to send a message to someone, even though they may probably be in the same building, same apartment, or probably just a street away. What happens when you send a message, right? This is our house. It goes from here to our Airtel internet. From there, it goes to another sets of internet, because let's say if you use Facebook, the Facebook server is in the US, right? And Airtel is, for example, in India. So it has to travel from India all the way till the US, right? And then comes the US version of whatever Airtel or whatever it is, whatever internet provider they have, right? And then from there it goes to what is called as the Facebook server or the Google server, right? And then it travels all the way back again, goes here, and then reaches Kavit, right? Now, for someone sitting in Chennai, for another person sitting in Chennai, when I send a message, why is the message traveling all the way till the US and getting retransmitted all the way back to Chennai again, right? Which is the very first question that we should be asking. Now, is this model right? Is this model wrong? In terms, I don't want to debate it on the technical aspects of it, but I want to discuss it from the privacy perspective, right? Now, from our understanding, whenever we, even the recent days, we have been talking about this whole idea of end-to-end encryption, right? That whatever message I send is so secure, so private, nobody can ever read it in the world, and all of this great statements. Especially, we've been hearing this from WhatsApp, right? But the reality is, look at how many people are actually reading your message. They may not read your message, right? But they can very clearly know, okay, you're sending a message, or you're sending a file, you're sending it at this point, you're sending from this location, you're receiving messages of this size, you're probably receiving a file of this size, you're receiving the data from this location. There's a lot of data that you spill over, right? Airtel, for example, knows where you are, how much messages are you receiving, what kind of messages are you reading. When I mean kind of messages, is it text, is it files, is it video, audio, and then who is probably sending it? Is it Facebook? Is it WhatsApp? Is it Google, etc. Right? And so does everyone in between. You see, I'm talking about this whole stack of people. All of them, all of them know so much. Okay, and then is your thing of Facebook or Google knowing what it is even better, right? And then it's you two, the two people who are trying to converse. So the problem with centralized infrastructure or centralized form of internet that most of us have been relying today, including that of Classmeet, right? Classmeet is to some level centralized. I'll come to what Classmeet's actual model is, but to some level, most of this still applies to Classmeet, right? So what we're trying to do out of this models of internet is, what first thing is what we call as data leaks. There is a lot of leaks, one, two, three, four, right? And this is usually about 10 or 15 people. So that's another 10, 15 of them. There is so much of data leaks that we are calling it, which is called as digital footprints, right? A digital footprint is any kind of information that it could be residual information or complete information, right? Any kind of information that we are leaving out in spaces is called digital footprints. There is so much of digital footprints and digital footprint crumbs that we are dropping everywhere just to send a message called hi, right? Are you here? Have you started? Etc. Now, if these people itself can understand so much, and if WhatsApp and Facebook is coming and telling you, saying in the name of end-to-end encryption, that is how much we can also understand, right? That's completely unbelievable, right? I'm not going to go into the specifics. Even if you want WhatsApp or something, I can give you alternative links where we have already done a talk on it. But roughly, it is not acceptable to completely unbelievable to the fact that when Facebook says that we know only so much as the internet service providers know, is not an acceptable fact at all, right? So, but is this the only model of internet? Is this the only way the internet can function? The answer is simple no, right? Now, the biggest problem that we have in this model is, let's say tomorrow you choose to move from Facebook to Instagram, right? You have to lose everything to move to Instagram, which means that you cannot take a download of your Facebook and upload it to Instagram and continue saying that I'll use Instagram. You cannot take a copy of Instagram messages and then upload it to some other service, maybe Google Plus or something, and then say that I'll continue to use it. This is what we call as interoperability. That is, between services, can we completely migrate without the loss of data? Uh, Going beyond Facebook and everything, let's say your Google Docs, right? You cannot take your Google Docs download and put it to some other cloud provider, let's say Microsoft, and just start using it like that. It won't work. You have to download every file. You have to re-upload the file. Hope that both service providers have the same font, same patterns, and then only you can do whatever you're wanting to do, right? There is a lot of work. Now, to us, it is just a document file, right? To us, it's just a status message, just text file. But why is it that I cannot even, make the choice of migrating from one thing to another? One, without losing data, two, without an ease of migration, right? So this is what everybody sells. They say that this is our data, right? So every time you post something on your Google Drive or your Facebook servers, I mean WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is, they basically have a co-ownership of your data, which means that they get to also use your data, and that is exactly how targeted advertisements work. Okay. Now this is one model of the way internet functions. Now the second model is slightly more fun. It's actually beautiful a little more. It's called the decentralized model. So what happens in the decentralized model is you can run whatever you want. You can run whatever you want, right? Each of us create our own but small ecosystems. That is what is a decentralized model. For example, Classmeet is a decentralized model, which means the core of the video conferencing is called Big Blue Button, and anybody can take and run this video conferencing system, make modifications however they want to, and then run it for themselves, right? That is called the decentralized. I'm not sharing it with someone else. For example, if someone else is using Big Blue Button, they cannot directly talk to my Big Blue Button. That's not possible, right? So you can either be in Big Blue Button run by Class Chiguru, or you can be in Big Blue Button run by someone else. This is called the decentralized model. Let's take a better example. Uh, let's take Google Drive itself as an example, right? So let's say there is a free software alternative. So there's an alternative called Nextcloud, which is what I use, right? So I can run my own Nextcloud where I keep all my documents, I open it, edit it, I unopen it, and all of that. I can do all of that. And so does, let's say, Nirangal also wants to keep one and run for itself. So this is called decentralized. That is, I run one for myself. I exclude the rest of the world and only include things I run for myself. This is called as the decentralized model. The third model is what we call as the decentralized federated model, which means, let's say, and this is exactly where tools like Mastodon or Plemora come in. These are alternatives to your Twitter, Facebook. These are social media platforms. Okay, Mastodon, Plemora, PeerTube. PeerTube is an alternative to YouTube. Okay, so in that, what happens is the problem with this decentralized model, right? Let's say I am in the world of panda and I want to move, let's say, to the world of dogs, right? All I have to do is I have to have one account here. I have to have another account here, which is what we call as identity, right? You having an account in a service is called an identity. Now, I should have an identity in the world of pandas. I should have the identity in the world of dogs. Now, tomorrow, if I choose to move to cats, then I should also have another identity in the world of cats, right? So, in simple English, it's like I want to have an account here, I want to have an account there, I will have an account here, I will have an account everywhere, right? As long as I don't want to talk to someone in cat, I don't need an account there. But if you want to talk to someone in the cat world, I need an account there, right? That's called the decentralization. But what federation solves is when I have the identity of a cat, why should I take another identity of a panda? Right? That's the most simplest question it says. Now, what federation says is you have a singular identity with which you can converse everywhere. Your emails is a very good example, right? Let's say you want to send an email to someone at Hotmail, right, at Microsoft or Zoho or something. You don't go create an account there also, right? You have, let's say you have an email at gmail.com. Just from your Gmail ID, you're free to send to whoever has an email. That is called decentralization and federation, which means a singular identity but multiple communication. Now, this is the most interesting part because what is happening here is that all of them, all the animal worlds, right, are adhering to one standard. They are adhering to what they call as interoperability, right? A message, an email that I receive in the cat world is the same as an email receiving in the panda world. There is no change. Okay, and that is exactly how it is easy for us to communicate cross. Uh, I can just have an identity in panda and still message someone on the cat world, right? I can have the identity in a rabbit world and still talk to someone on the dog world. Now, the larger question is, let's say the servers running in the cat world have suddenly been destroyed. right? For some reason, let's say there's a fire or something, they're not reachable, and the rest of the world can still exist and still communicate with each other. It's only the cats in the cat world cannot talk to the rest of the world, right? But it is not going to stop dogs from talking to the rabbits, for example. But in a centralized model, if this server goes down, none of us can talk to each other, right? That is another problem of centralization. In a decentralized world, anyway, nobody can talk to anybody, right? So if the cat world goes down, in this case, all cats cannot talk to each other. But if you have an identity in the dog world, you can talk to other dogs, right? That is decentralization. But in decentralized federation, as long as you have an identity anywhere, you can talk to everyone anywhere. And if the cat world is down, only to the cats you cannot talk. That is the decentralized federation model, right? This is currently the model that most of the alternative privacy respecting platforms are starting to pick up, right? Matrix, for example, your emails already is an existing example. XMPP, even as a chat. So we look at alternatives, but all of them are adhering to decentralized federation. And this is very important because let's say tomorrow I believe that no, I have to run my own server, whatever, because of my country's privacy policies or let's say the dog world is, for example, in India, right? The servers are hosted in India, and I believe that no, I don't want a server in India. I would probably want a server, let's say, in Europe. So in such cases, I have the autonomy to make a choice on where my server has to be, which server is suitable for me. Every server now also can set their own guidelines on how, what, who can be here, etc. I can choose the best one that fits for me and I can continue to that. So imagine this like lots of small communities. Now, when we look at it from the government's perspective, right, from the state perspective, when the service is centralized, they can just shoot you down, right? It's that simple. They can shut down your account, they can delete your post, they can do whatever. But in a decentralized federated model, who are they going to shut? Where are they going to shut? Because the data that you post on a Pandas world is going to be existing everywhere. And even if you, let's say, you shut down the dog world, the data is still going to be there in the rest of the places, right? There's no idea of shutting down something. Now, the final model is what we call as the peer-to-peer model, which means if I have to talk to you, I directly talk to you. Even in the decentralized federated model, for example, let's say when the cat world goes down, even the cats cannot talk to each other, right? But in a peer-to-peer model, there is no idea of a server, right? Everybody is an individual, and any individual can talk to any individual, right? That's how peer-to-peer model is. This is now, if you have to compare these models, this is how I would call it. Uh, Centralization is an always bad model. So, which is one reason I never suggest people to use Signal, because Signal is another centralization. It may be a walled garden from WhatsApp, but Signal is still a centralized system. And a centralized system is always bad, irrespective of it being a free software, a privacy respecting tool, etc. A centralized system is always bad, right? One, because the servers can go down, the costs increase, and everything. It's absolutely not viable for us to be in a centralized ecosystem if we really want costs to be clean. If we want communities to coexist properly, then it's completely impossible for us. Now, when we take decentralized models, the costs of running operations is quite low, but again requires everyone to run everything. If there'll be too many identities, and suddenly if there's a need for something, there'll be a lot of load on the server. So it is a good model compared to centralization, but it's not very easy for us, right? But in terms of federation and decentralization, the reason most tools are adopting to this wherever possible is because irrespective of what is the today's hyping thing, my load does not necessarily increase at all, right? Why? Because I am doing everything on my server, on my systems, on my tools. All the data is still there on my own tools, on my own server. So it is as good as like how I have always been using. That is always how I'll be using. One. And two, it is this whole idea of, I have one identity which I want to express, and it is the same identity that I go with everywhere, and that is much more useful and interesting, even when you look at it technically, when you look at philosophically, when you look at financially. Not asking you to replicate your identity in like 1,000 places is always a viable option, right? Peer to peer is, in my view, is technically the most perfect solution if you really have to adhere to privacy. But it's not, I mean, the way things are right now, it's not a very, very viable state of things for everyone to take forward, right? The kind of alternatives that exist is quite limited. There's not a lot of alternatives at this point in time. There are very few, many things are still in development. So we are hoping to see peer-to-peer pickups very soon. But at this point in time, the most viable alternative for us is decentralization federations, right? But irrespective of all of that, free software is very fundamental. Now, coming to alternatives, these are some of the alternatives, right? I put, yeah, Lavanya, go on.
So, mentioned the centralized model is bad pretty much all the time. So, why is it that it is the most popular model out of all the four that you mentioned?
Comfort, right? Now, when I have to talk about decentralization or decentralized federation, the ownership of where is my account supposed to be comes back on the users, right? Uh, what is if, for example, if you have to sign up in Facebook, you just have to open facebook.com, right? On the contrary, if you have to use Mastodon, you have to choose a server that works best for you, right? You because every server has different rules, every community has different needs. So that initial effort is exactly what causes things not to go out. Even when WhatsApp was chosen, when WhatsApp was supposed to be a problematic thing, and we all suddenly realized it, everybody was comfortable moving to Signal because that's one app I download, I enter my phone number, and I'm done, right? The comfort that comes with centralization is always amazing, but the comfort in decentralization or decentralized federation, there is an initial barrier, right? It's once you create an account and once you establish an identity, it's the same. Nothing changes beyond that. But in my perspective, many of us are not comfortable to go beyond that initial barrier. That's the problem. Okay. Fedverse, yes. Yeah. Okay. So, for example, this is a decentralized federated solution. This is a decentralized solution only. Again, decentralized only, decentralized federated, decentralized federated, right? The rest of it is just desktop apps, so I'm not going into are they decentralized or federated. But even, okay, I'll share a link of this is Chiguru's YouTube channel. You can also find recordings of these in Classmate. But roughly, we have done a talk before on is Signal really the alternative to WhatsApp, right? Where we've explored alternative models, why is the problem, the history of WhatsApp, the history of alternatives. It's a little more detailed session, so you can watch that. It's available both in Tamil and English. So you're free to pick whatever suits you, right? But roughly these are the alternatives, right? Now, the most simplest question that you again want to go back and ask all of you is, from your personal perspective, what do you think is stopping you from adopting to the alternatives? Anybody is free to answer. I mean, it's not like, at least most of you would have known of Firefox, right? Over Chrome. Something as simple as that. Why are we using still Chrome over Firefox? Why do you think, in your personal perspective, that you make choices here over choices here?
I used to use Firefox. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, I think for me, from a work perspective, nobody uses Matrix, and work has become like where your clients want to talk to you on WhatsApp. Everyone is on WhatsApp. It's faster, it's quicker. But on Matrix, I'm the only one. So who am I talking to actually? And I think it's the
Okay.
same for Classmate and Zoom, I guess, is because like it's difficult to get other people to convert. And it becomes so that you are difficult and you are choosing a platform that is not easy to use. I mean, according to others, it's not easy to use or whatever.
Mhm.
You know, it becomes an
Yeah.
argument of why do we need to do this when when we already have a Zoom account? Why do we need to try another whatever?
Right. Fair enough. Others?
Same for me as well, especially like if I talk about WhatsApp, because everybody is on WhatsApp. If I am the person, if I'm the only one who's going to join Matrix, then really who am I going to talk to? So just same on what Chris said, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Rima has typed habituation and familiarity. Firefox versus Chrome. Okay.
And also, when we are talking about classmeet over Zoom, what
Mm-hmm.
strikes to me is that like the institutions or organizations we are a part of, so they take a few decisions that this is what everything is going to be. For example, like in our college, everything happens on Zoom, and it just uh, affects us so much that even when we are not doing work in college, we ought like reflexively go to Zoom and use our Zoom account to do other things when we can easily do it over Classmeet. It's just the thought never crosses my mind ki, oh, I have an alternative, because the entire like in the morning 4 hours and other things in which are related to college I'm doing over Zoom, and it becomes a habit, and it happens with other people as well. They are also using Zoom because of the organization and institution, so it becomes like a common thing. So I guess that affects a lot.
Hmm. Okay. Fair enough. Others?
I guess it's also because, as far as Chrome is considered, it often comes pre-installed with the hardware that we use. So, like the phones will have have Chrome software, or even the laptops will have it. So it's easier for you to just stay with it instead of going for, say, Firefox, because it just becomes more easier. And it's also as far as Matrix goes, it's also about the lack of awareness, because I didn't know Matrix was an option before this happened, just like a few days back.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Fair enough.
So I used to use Firefox when I was a kid. Like that's the browser I started with.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found out about Chrome, I just found it to be a smoother and more user friendly experience. And I guess since then I've just been using Chrome.
Okay. Any other perspectives? Reasons how are been called?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is also convincing others. Like I was giving this example of a college which invited us to speak, and I was telling them that I'm concerned about the security in Google Meet or Microsoft Teams or Zoom, and they are like, okay, if you're giving an alternative, I've not heard of it. How can I trust you? They would rather trust a multinational company with shoddy reputation than a free software cooperative or an individual who's willing to provide services.
Hmm. The usual argument, the way people have described this to me before, is a known devil. I mean, yeah, known devil is better than an unknown angel, right? So I have literally heard a professor tell this to me, but yeah. Okay, anybody else? Okay, I want to go through each of these arguments one by one. Okay, again, but before I go in, please note that these are perspectives that I am sharing also. right? There is no force on any of you. It's still your personal preference. But these are perspectives. I am talking from the view of privacy. Okay. Let's take Firefox to Chrome, right? The two most arguments that have come in, or the three most arguments that have come in, is one, it is by default available in many of the places, so we just end up using. And two, there is some kind of a smoother experience and all of that. And three, probably didn't know, or just that everything just works on Chrome, so I didn't have to care about Firefox, right? Now, so the way, if I have to collate this argument, if I have to respond back to you, asking a question, kind of a harsh question, please ignore it. I mean, please don't take it seriously, but isn't the social fabric of just man and a woman a much more smoother experience than the diversity that we're talking about and the independent freedom that we're talking about? Is that a yes? Is that a no? I'm talking purely from the social fabric. It's just much easier, right? You have these kind of physical body, you're a woman, you have this kind of a physical body, you're a man. That's it. I mean, like everything else can be excluded, everything else to be stopped. Right? Isn't that a much more smoother social experience if we have to really call it out? Why are we really fighting for the rest of it? Anybody?
Very important question you're asking, but I think when it comes to these things, it's, I mean, as silly as it's habit over
Right.
change.
Right. Yeah. So the first time when I realized this perspective, right, it was so hard for me to accept that I have been so much, all of these reasons that we have been giving, right, personal reasons that we have been giving. The most important reason all of this stems from is a habit over everything else, right? It's not that, let's say your default hardware never had Chrome installed, right? And let's say if you take a Microsoft thing, let's say it comes with installed with Internet Explorer or Edge browser. You don't end up using Edge because it comes pre-installed, right? But you're comfortable if Google Chrome comes pre-installed, right? It's not a choice of pre-installation. It's just that you want this, and if it comes pre-installed, I'm more comfortable. If it doesn't, I'll anyways go install it, right? It's not a question of coming pre-installed or not, right? And the reason this question is very important for us to understand, or this perspective is very important to understand, is when we say that, it's just habituation, it's just this, it's just that, and that's why we're not doing it. Mind all of us that eventually, when our freedom is to be compromised, we would also end up giving reasons on why it is okay to be compromised, right? And there are many reasons I'm saying Firefox is to be used over Chrome. Is primarily one, it is a fully free software, which means any of us can take Firefox, read through the code, and find out if something is wrong, right? Two, Firefox stands on privacy. Protecting your individual privacy is no way comparable to what Chrome is. Chrome, on alternatively, collects all of your data, sends your data to Google, right? It knows what websites you open, how much time you spend on a website. It reads what you do on the website. It does everything and then collects everything and sends everything. And what they give you back is a personalized experience, right? This whole idea of a personalized experience. Why? I can know that when I know you better, right? For example, when it comes to, let's say, food choices, let's say you and I are just meeting once. I don't know what food you like. But let's say I have a history of all every day's food you have eaten. I can obviously tell, hey, do you want to eat the dosa which you like most? Right? You may feel comfortable. Oh my God, how does he know about my dosa? But the question really, really is that how did I come to know that you like dosa? Right? It's not a question of is my dosa suggestion right or wrong. It's a question of how did I even come to that conclusion. While Firefox does not give you a personalized experience, it is the best browser at this point in time, which can preserve your privacy the most, right? but also ensuring that the whole thing is a free software. There are other alternatives, right, which keep saying that we are the most private browser, etc. But there are always some or the other catch. Either the source code is not open, or the development team does not have a strong adherence to privacy and they just use privacy as an advertisement model. There are so many issues, but Firefox historically has established its respect and its fight for privacy, and it has done it, right? Why Matrix over WhatsApp? One of the most argument that came for WhatsApp here is it's like, everybody is just there on WhatsApp. They want to talk to me on WhatsApp and I should be there on WhatsApp. This is what we call as the social pressure in the other sense, but in the general sense, it's called the social circle, right? But it's important for us to ask the question is on as to why is everyone on WhatsApp, right? WhatsApp and Signal are the same, like exactly the same, just run by two different providers. If everything is the same, why are people not on Signal and why are they on WhatsApp? Ignore Matrix also. Let's take Signal and WhatsApp. Exactly the same encryption, exactly the same user experience, exact contact discovery. You can always find new people. Your verification model is the same. Everything you can do on WhatsApp, you can do on Signal. There's no change at all. But then why are people not on Signal but on WhatsApp? Has any of you ever thought about it?
Uh, Hello.
Yeah, go on, Naveen.
Yeah, actually, in WhatsApp, there is some issues were there, before 1 month or something. So everyone started to change for Signal. And when I asked my friends to come for Signal, they are asking, are they having a option to put status like that? They asked. When I said no, then they said, then we don't want to use Signal.
Social presence and publication. Okay. Okay, fine. Status is a very important aspect. But did you also know that your status is not end-to-end encrypted? And Facebook actually reads all of your status messages. So any images
But
that you put on your
sorry,
status,
yeah,
sorry, Chris, go
but
on.
that's what I was last week when we spoke.
Hmm.
For me, that's what I feel. That for them, they don't care about privacy or end-to-end encryption. For them, it is about doing, uh, you know,
Living the
XYZ
social
things.
ambit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I
So
understand.
how do you change that? That
Right.
Actually,
We have a
mindset
they
that's
think
not going to change.
what they think like what am I there to hide from me, from them? There is nothing
Yeah, exactly.
with me, so I don't want to hide anything like that. They're saying, like they don't know about the secrecy and hidden things or something.
right. So next time, Naveen, if someone says I have nothing to hide, right, you can ask them two different scenarios. If you have nothing to hide, don't wear a dress. And there's like nothing to hide, right? It's the same thing that everyone has. Like, it's a harsh way of making them realize that, okay, I am actually hiding things even though we know we share the same thing. And that is a very good conversation point when you have to talk about privacy, right? Sometimes you have to give the harshest example that they can't even think about to even start a conversation, right? We'll come to that. We have a dedicated section on that. We'll come to that, right? Uh, but one of the most common reasons on why people choose to be in WhatsApp is primarily because whenever the whole history of WhatsApp comes pre-installed in hardware. Most phones that you buy today comes with WhatsApp pre-installed, right? And the second thing is initially WhatsApp was the only choice, and the rest everything was a very technically or a very nerdy kind of an alternative. And when WhatsApp came, it has this beautiful interface, and everybody started using it. And thus, right from 2008 to now, it has become the normal thing to have a WhatsApp account, right? This is what we call as the social peer pressure. Uh, it's like, hey, you're not on WhatsApp, what the hell, right? That's the most common question. And when this question comes for everyone, everyone is like, I will be on WhatsApp, or else, people are going to look at me as some weirdo. But honestly, when I quit WhatsApp, I found the least of the issues for me. I mean, initially, yeah, I was like, oh, I had to talk to someone on this, I had to talk to someone on this. But then eventually, what I realized was, okay, if they're not on Signal or Matrix, I'll just call them and talk to them. It's like done. I mean, I didn't have too much of trouble. But then I could call. That's a very different conversation. So I think the same arguments apply to classmeet over Zoom, right? So primarily, if we have to conclude most of the arguments that we have made, right? One is the social ambit and the social peer pressure that exists around us on, these tools over these tools, right? That's a very common ambit that is established. It's also the same ambit on why, when even since most of you are from also college, why you are forced to use Microsoft Office than LibreOffice, right? They'll say, oh, this is not there. The formatting is wrong. Just shut up and use Microsoft Office. My professor used to say that. Just shut up and use this. Why are you unnecessarily wasting my time with your tools, right? So these are like the most common responses, and all of this stems from one root cause, that technology is like this only. This perspective of, if I don't use Zoom, I am probably outside the circle, or I'm outside the social circle. If I'm not on WhatsApp, I'm probably outside the social circle, right? This whole idea of a social circle that has been established is exactly the root cause. But why were they established is because companies like this could actually spend millions of dollars in creating advertisements, in creating, in targeting you to use them. In, Firefox, for example, the Mozilla Foundation can never talk to a hardware provider and pay them to install Firefox by default, right? The communities here don't have that scale of a money, but the corporates here have that scale of a money, right? It's purely a battle of money. And if these companies are talking about privacy, be very clear that they're not talking really about privacy, right? Versus when these alternatives are talking about privacy, they're actually talking about privacy, the real individual privacy, for example, which is one reason this is a very well advertised corporate ecosystem, versus this is the least advertised community ecosystem. And that's exactly why these things always take over, and these things don't usually comfortably take over. But the question really is, what can we do, right? How do we create ecosystem? How do we talk about it? Like I told in the previous session, there is no alternative to education, right? If you really have to drive adoption beyond policy, beyond procedure, education is the only way, right? The simplest effort that all of us could take is, you know what? If you are on Matrix, I'm going to stop talking to you on WhatsApp, right? Prefer alternatives and that communication model over WhatsApp. For example, if all of you are wanting to communicate with each other, if all of you have a Matrix account, prefer to communicate over Matrix on WhatsApp. Even though you'll want to open that WhatsApp and just send saying, "Hey, are you coming to office?" Send that message over what Matrix, right? It's the same message. Both of you are going to receive it the same way, the same encryption. Everything is the same. But it's just that, I have WhatsApp also, so why should I use Matrix? Question has to be avoided. And that's exactly the first thing is your personal change, right? There are about, excluding me and Anu, there are about 10 of you, actually 9 of you, right? Can all 9 of you talk on Matrix between each other, right? You already have a community there. You already have an ecosystem there, right? The most common question that came up here was, who am I talking to in Matrix? You're talking to 8 other people who are your fellows, right? And then there is me, there is Anu, there are other people with whom you can connect to, right? Eventually it becomes 10 people. And when you start onboarding someone who you think, has understood your idea and want to take that first effort, introduce Matrix over Signal, right? Remember always to choose a decentralized federated ecosystem as an alternative over just a decentralized alternative, right? So when you start introducing and slowly start talking to them, initially when I used to send messages on Matrix, people didn't even see. So I used to call them and tell them, saying, hey, I sent a message in Matrix, right? I had to do that about 10, 15 times. But eventually what happened was they started realizing that if I'm sending something, I'll always be sending in Matrix, and they started checking Matrix, right? The change is slow, but it is possible. It has been happening over days, years, months, right? And there is no. So one another comment I saw here was, okay, I'll also create an account, right? I don't know who sent it, but yeah. My argument to you back is, please don't create an account, right? If you're saying that, hey, I see, you're talking about matrix, so I'll also create an account. Don't create an account, right? First, be informed that this is really the right alternative for you, and then create an account, right? The reason we're suggesting matrix and not signal is because it is decentralized and federated. If you're inclined to this ideology, create an account, right? If not, what happens is every dummy account, even when you have to look at it from a technology perspective, every dummy account that is there is very hard to maintain, right? Your server migration, updates, everything becomes a problem, right? Two, you will be like, hey, I am also there. I am also there. You when choosing an alternative is not about you also echoing the social ethos, right? Choosing an alternative is about your privacy. You cannot be making choices like, oh, okay, every one of you are there, I will also be there. That's not a very privacy friendly argument, right? So I'm not telling to you people, I'm saying when you talk to someone else and when they say, I will also create an account because you're talking to me so much, stop them and ask them if they are convinced about it. If not, first convince them. Then let's talk about an account. Okay. So these are some of the very common things you can be doing. But the most important argument you have to do is just like how the question of, why are we not accepting the social fabric of a man and a woman, but we are fighting for the alternative fabric of, identity decentralization, and how I want to represent myself as my choice. How much of a, a passionate fight that is. That's exactly how passionate it is to fight in the digital world also, primarily because if Facebook tomorrow removes the option of, you know, the alternatives and just gives you the option saying man and male, female, then all the fight you have done in the physical world is already a lost battle, right? If you take caste, for example, you can fight against caste in the physical world how much ever you want. But if Facebook tomorrow says that, hey, enter your caste, and then it gives you 4,000 options, and if half the world starts entering it, your battle of caste is already lost, right? Now, these tools, the reason we have to be careful about these tools and we have to keep a strong watch on these tools is not just because that these tools are stealing our data and everything. These tools have the ability to reinforce the most comfortable social fabric that has been defined AAA, okay? Uh, it is so easy for them to reinforce a fabric into all of us and make us believe that all of our battle was useless, right? And they can do it in a week. That's the most powerful thing, right? Which is one reason I keep saying that these alternatives come with a lot of money power, with a lot of political power, with a lot of everything, right? Versus the communities, replace these communities with communities like Nurangal, right? You don't have the money power, you don't have the battle. I mean, there is a lot of, even for a small change, there is a lot of effort you're forced to put, right? And imagine someone coming and saying that, no, 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 this is all stupid. That's exactly what's happening in the digital world, right? The digital tools that we're talking about, the non-privacy respecting tools, are trying to enforce these social fabrics into the common ecosystem. And the more we stay silent about it, the more we don't adhere to alternatives, this reinforcement will be successful eventually, right? Caste system is already digitized. For example, if you go to Facebook and do targeted advertisements, the Indian government is listing somewhere about 2,800 castes that exist in India, but Facebook is listing about 4,000, right? So imagine how much of research they would have done to reach that much of conclusion. And honestly, you can target advertisements based on a caste, okay, in Facebook. You may not be allowed initially, but if you are a consistent, a very frequent targeter, you can target Facebook advertisements by caste, right? Which is more scarier. And it is very important for us to understand these things. And adopting to alternatives is not just about, your privacy being secure. It is about creating privacy as a social fabric. And it is also about ensuring that the fights that we do in the physical world actually also succeed in the digital world, right? If you want gender diversity in the digital world, it is as good as saying that, I want decentralized federation as the internet model, because that's exactly the diversity that we're fighting for in the real world. So with that, I think Yes, I'm not sure how many of you know Aaron Swartz, but please do read about him. A very important activist, someone who has fought on so many diverse things, not just on privacy, but has fought on gender, has fought on state surveillance, has fought against, has fought for human rights, has fought for so many things. Very important person to read about the history about. Right. So in short, choose something that is free software always, and in free software also choose something that is privacy respecting for you. And even in privacy respecting, if you're choosing an internet model, always choose a decentralized federated model of internet. So with that, we hope we can live in a free society. And yeah, I'm open for questions. So Delphina, I just saw your message, the Edward Snowden one, right? The problem with this argument, right, in the Indian context, is like I don't care about free speech also, right?
Okay.
To me,
Okay,
free
I
speech
get.
is like I can put a message in Facebook, I can put a message in Twitter. What is stopping me? What free speech are you talking about? Right? This is the most common response.
Okay.
So it so this is a very politically correct quote, right? It's
Right.
not a very humanly connecting quote. Especially
Oh,
in our context, it's not a very humanly connecting quote.
okay. Yeah, I think I agree. Then with the example of not what you have to wear clothes is I think something people can more easily connect with.
Yeah, I mean that's just an example. So pick something that is so personally attacking on them in the first stage, right? It's only when you first conversation when you attack and then you smoothen out, that's when they realize the intensity of the conversation that you're talking about. That intensity, the first initial intensity realization is very important. Any questions?
I'm not sure. Okay, maybe people can ask more questions, and I'm also not sure how much time you have, Ram, today. But I was also thinking. Sorry, go ahead, Ram.
Yeah, I can stay till 10:30. So that's about another 15-20 minutes we have.
Okay, so yeah, definitely we can welcome questions from everyone. But I also know for a fact that most of us here in this group, I think perhaps excluding you and me, are from many of them. Maybe there are a few others, but many of them are from a mental health background, either studying or planning to practice therapy. And so I think one of the things that has come that I think I've been concerned about is since this whole COVID lockdown started, a lot of therapy and things have moved online. So are there any specific suggestions or things you would suggest in terms of how we secure therapist client communication? Anything that you have suggestions or pointers to suggest?
The first argument would be to stop using Zoom or Google Meet. Uh, while I understand as an organization, it may not be necessarily possible with whatever organization you work with. Try to avoid that idea of using Zoom or Google Meet. Now, the simplest arguments that you're going to be getting is as an organization, this is what we have promised to our clients. And because this is what we have promised our clients, you have to use this. This is the way we're going to be securing privacy, right? Now, here privacy is limited to an organizational procedure rather than actually. So, whenever we talk about mental health, for example, right, what we actually define here as privacy is, in the legal term, it's called as the consultant or the counselor client privilege, which means that whatever is conversed between the two stays between the two, right? That's the legal guarantee for it. The other technical guarantee that is given is irrespective, unless it is a legal requirement where you consent to us sharing the data, we will not be sharing the data to anyone else, right? This is a privacy guarantee that an organization gives. Now, uh, if Zoom is the only force of choice that you have, there's not a lot you can do but to go talk to your organization about alternative models. It could be Jitsi or it could be Classmate, it could be whatever. Classmate may not be a very viable choice in such a scenario, but Jitsi may be a very, very viable choice. Okay, one. Two, do not limit your perspective of privacy when you use digital alternatives. I think we've talked about most of it. Apply these principles to your context of privacy, and it's very important for you to realize that it cannot just be so limited to just these two, three things, right? That's a very important realization for you to have. It's not just about me having a call and nobody listening to it is not privacy, right? The question is your sessions recorded? If so, who has access to your recordings, right? Was the customer around with someone? So when the clients used to come to your counseling location, right, you had a room, you know everything was covered, right? In the digital world, that's not the case, right? So it's very important for you to have these realizations and then go talk to your organization. As in, I wouldn't even say just like that, go talk to your organization. Sit down, think through all the arguments. If you have more, if you need more clarity, you are free to reach out to Delphino or me or whoever, right? Get that clarity and then go with an argument to your organization on why alternative models should be adopted than just Zoom or Google Meet, whatever it is, right? Uh, that is the work you're supposed to be doing. It's not like, oh, I suddenly want privacy today. I feel empowered about it. So I'm going to stop using Google Meet or Zoom and then start using Classmate is not a way to go, right? Because there has to be an organizational buy-in. There is legal guarantees that your organization is given to your clients. There are so many things that come into the place, right? So in short, talk about the perspective of privacy at an organizational level if you're a mental health practitioner as an organization. But if you're an independent mental health practitioner, I think the choice is just yours. And a good start would probably be Jitsi for you. Then, you can limit who can come in, who cannot come in. I mean, Classmate can, but the user interface is a slightly different one. If you think they're going to be comfortable, you're free to use, right? There are options to tell that, okay, you have to let who has to come in and all of that. But Jitsi is also another viable alternative that you have for that kind of a use case, right? But beyond that, do not assume that whatever data you keep typing in your computer or laptop is very safe, especially if you are using the Microsoft operating system. All of your keystrokes are also recorded, right? Uh, Microsoft promises this thing called as typing personalization, where they give you word pop-ups based on the most common words that you type. In short, what Microsoft is saying is all keystrokes will record, so which means every character you type on your keyboard is recorded, right? So you should safely assume that Microsoft knows every single thing you're typing. Microsoft knows what apps you're using. Microsoft knows how long you're using each app for. And thus Microsoft can conclusively tell this is what you're doing, right? And also has access to all the information, your files, your documents, your typing, everything they have access to, probably including your passwords, right? How Microsoft chooses to use it or not is a very different question, but from a privacy perspective, why should Microsoft know it at all? Is the first question you should be asking. So one, as an individual, irrespective of your organization, you can throw away your Microsoft operating system and use a GNU Linux based operating system. Maybe Debian is a very good choice, right? And then slowly pick every single digital tool that you're using as a part of conversation and start looking out for privacy respecting free software alternatives for each of those, right? That is the only way you can make a change. It's a very slow process, but change at least can be, ensured. Any other questions, or anybody wants to share anything else? That's also fine.
Thank you, Ram. I just wanted to check if there is somebody who has a question but is uncomfortable asking because this is being recorded and streamed. We can close the streams and still interact with Ram for the next few moments. If that's a preference, we can actually close the streams also. So let's do that. If there are no more questions, then Rima, maybe you can formally conclude and then we can stop the streams, and maybe Ram can be here for a few moments in case someone wants to ask something off the record.
Delphine, I actually wanted to propose something
Okay.
to you as an organization, right? Uh, so we were discussing internally on what after the talk, right? Uh, this talk is just an initial effort, right? Just the hello
Correct.
world or introductions part. So what happens after this? And
Hmm.
we can do this after stopping the recording, streaming, and all of that also. That's fine. But I just wanted to bring it up.
If there is something to say on the record, we can say. Otherwise, we can go with closure and still stay back. Yes, we do need to have a follow-up. I don't know what works best.
Okay. One thing that we were discussing was to probably have a follow-up session about a month or so after. Today is March 12th, right? Maybe April 12th or so, something like that. Just to, I mean, that is good enough time, I think, for you as an organization and stakeholders to, sit down, discuss much more things, and come up with more focused questions or perspectives or contradictory conclusions that you have, and then maybe we can discuss after a month maybe on these things specifically. It's not going to be like a talk, but it can be more like a conversation, right? I can also invite probably other members here, and then we can have a conversation on internal discussions that you have had which you wanted to discuss further. In that way we can keep this ethos of organizing much more lively than just we did a talk and then we concluded and that's it. I mean, like, I have to go back to normal life kind of.
Totally agree. It might be outside the formal window of internship for many of the participants, but I think we do look at, I mean, as we said when we were doing the internship expectations, what you're going to do for Nirangal is not just in the period of internship, but the perspectives that you carry with you for the rest of your life. So even if you think that after the period of internship you may want to do it on a weekend or something, we can figure it out. We are open to having this conversation. We would love to connect with you and continue to work together on all aspects that we have discussed during the internship, including on gender and sexuality and software freedom and privacy. I think there are a couple of participants outside Nirangal. You are also welcome outside the Nirangal interns, you are also welcome to continue to be engaged with us on these conversations. So, does anyone have anything to say before we close the recording? If not, it's for Reema.
I had a question. So you said that the that even our typing and everything is safe. A lot of us do net banking on our laptops. So how much of that information is accessible to these multinational companies, do you think?
Okay, I'm sorry. Irrespective of you accessing net banking or Facebook, it's still the same keyboard that you type in. So I don't think they discriminate between, oh, it's net banking, no, I'll not track this, or Facebook, oh, okay, I'll track this. I don't think there's any kind of discrimination like that. They are like welcoming everything, is my understanding.
She's asking about the security.
So, so in short, Jaya, as much as possible, whenever you do net banking, uh, again, if you have the alternative, if you have the option to quit Microsoft and use a free software, that's your first possible choice. And two, if at all, if you still want to do net banking on Microsoft, try to use Firefox. Uh, Firefox with 2, 3 add-ons, and generally Firefox has the ability to block all your trackers, blockers. So Firefox has the ability to limit how much of information the underlying operating system can know. But the ultimate solution is to quit using Microsoft and start using a free software operating system and then use Firefox on top of it. That's the closest to general security that you can have.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we'll formally close the session. All right. Thank you so much, Ram, for giving us this insightful knowledge about freedom software over a span of 2 days. There were a lot of things that I personally did not have any idea about, and now I do. I'll go back and watch the recordings again for a clearer understanding, and maybe we can do the monthly meet up and discuss more ideas. So, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Uh, we can stop the recording.